Welcome to the Open to Hope Show in partnership with the Compassionate Friends. I'm your host, Dr. Heidi Horsley, and I'm here today with my co-host and mom, Dr. Gloria Horsley. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Heidi. Well, we have got a special treat today, I must say. It's a show that's really different for us because we're going to be talking about classical music and grief and loss. Hey, John, welcome to the show. I want to know what drew you to the idea of looking at death in classical music.
Well, it is such a classical music is such a microcosm of human experience, but truthfully, I didn't really think about it that much until a few years ago, where I was listening to classical radio one day, and a work came on that I'd never heard before. And at the end of it, I was in my car, and I was straining to hear what the work was and what the composer was. And it turns out it was Symphonia Romantica by Kurt Adderberg. Now, I had never heard the name in 40 years of listening to classical of Kurt Adderberg. And I tracked him down. I did some research, listened to some other of his works, and I got to thinking how many other composers are out there beyond Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, that, 95% of what we listen to in classical. How many other composers are out there that are worth hearing? I started studying obscure composers, wrote a book on the topic, and very closely related to the concept of obscurity, of course, is death. So then I got to thinking more and more about death and started becoming more and more aware of death in classical music. And it turns out this is something that many composers have tackled straight on, whereas most of us regular lay people tend to shy away from such a serious topic, and there is no more.
Music is so healing when you've had a trauma or a loss or that kind of thing. And I was thinking that you can really get into, maybe if you want to have a deep feeling of sadness, sometimes you want to do that, or you want to have a more uplifting feeling. I think you can find it in this music, don't you?
Oh, yes, everything's there. In the text sometimes of the symphony, I'm thinking of Zemlinsky's Lyric Symphony. There's a line from the poet, it's a choral symphony, and he's talking about, let it not be death, but a completion. That line really struck me because, there is in all of us, and in music itself, the desire to go on, to not end. You want the music to keep playing. You want your life to keep going.
Right.
But yet these things end. So the concept of completion, rather than being stolen from or cheated out of more life, if you sort of change your philosophy to life coming to a completion, it's a radical concept. I got that from classical music. You can find most anything in somewhere along the line from the various composers.
And what I love about your books, Bach in Heaven and The Promise of the Afterlife and the Death in Classical Music, is that you can read quotes by, you've really put this into perspective in this book, and you also have the wording for some of the music that you talk about in here. Well, here's a piece of music. Talk about Verdi first, and then let's hear the piece from Verdi.
Well, the piece that you've picked to clip here is the Verdi Requiem, the Day of Wrath section from it. It's one of the most powerful pieces of music from one of the most formidable composers. Verdi wrote this in memory of a poet, an Italian poet that he greatly admired, Alessandro Manzoni, and it was first performed in 1874. And some people, ironically or humorously, call it their favorite Verdi opera. It's so dramatic and so powerful, even though it's not an opera, it's a mass.
Okay. Now tell me again who he wrote that for.
That was in memory of a poet that he greatly admired, Manzoni. So it was for a friend. In his memory.
It kind of reminds me, Mom, of what grief feels like when I hear that piece. Because it is so powerful, and there's kind of like waves, of emotion.
One of the interesting things I did when I was researching this topic, I touched on opera. Every single opera could have probably 5 volumes written about it and does, but I came to realize of the top 25 operas, 88% of them, like 22 of the top 25 operas, really significantly about death.
Wow.
And there are some interesting books out there on the topic, but it sort of gives the audience a way to interact with the concept, a way to practice dying, to see others dying, a familiarization with a process that they don't encounter every day.
Music and opera taps into a deep emotion. It taps right
Yes.
into the heart and into those really deep emotions that we kind of have buried.
Many people go to music to try to alleviate those feelings, to try to work through them and come through them. You've touched on something very interesting. I also came across the writings for the first time of Schopenhauer, who wrote about what he felt the nature of music was, and he said that because music is the only perfectly abstract art form, it's not about people per se, it's not about sculpture or plays or literature or pictures, it's abstract. He thought that that made it a representation of that which cannot be represented, which in his mind was the ultimate metaphysical world or the spiritual world. And this is where we kind of cross the line into the real meaning of death. His writings were extremely influential to Wagner, who, when he encountered them, he read them straight through 4 times consecutively. And it shaped a lot of Wagner's work in opera and his thinking about death.
It's really hard to express verbally what it means to lose someone that you care about. It's hard to put that in words, but when you hear music and hear the power of it, it kind of transcends the words and kind of captures the experience of having a death and losing someone that you really loved.
I like the word that you just used, transcend, because you can start at one level in music. It can provide like courage, like a lot of operatic plots when someone dies, the word is courage, like Marcello says to Rodolfo in La Boheme, coraggio, or courage. And then from there you go to comfort, and then I touched on philosophy, but then you come, I think, to the final level of what music can bring here, which is transcendence. This is where you get into really an element of faith for the Christian outlook, of which Bach is probably the preeminent example. He was a great man of faith. He had many deaths in his family. One time he went on his trip, and when he returned home, he learned that his wife had died and was already buried for months.
Wow.
They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have instant communication in those days. If you went away for a few months, anything could happen, and you had no way of knowing until you came home. The Bach cantatas are a little bit lesser known than some of Bach's works. And one time I got it into my head, and it's always sung in German. I got it into my head, I wonder what they're singing. I got a book of translations, and I found a revelation in the text. These are white-hot words of faith, almost beyond that of the Bible. And Bach set 300 of these cantatas. I mean, it is just the certainty of the afterlife for the believer in words that I can hardly even express.
certainly beautiful. My goodness.
We touched on the men of faith, Bach, Handel, and Mozart, and so many of the others. Not everybody in the book that I've created, Death in Classical Music, was a person of faith. I'm thinking of Friedrich Delius, who wrote the Pagan Requiem. He was really adamantly opposed to all religions, Christian, Muslim, whatever. Yet, ironically, it was his final desire to be buried in a churchyard so that people would have a place to come and pay respects to him, remember his music, and that he could be remembered and not made obscure. So I could tell us a similar story about Rossini, who wrote his final work. He was a man of opera. He wrote his super successful man of opera. He retired when he was 38 years old. He was so wealthy. One of the last works he wrote was called Le Petit Mass Solennel, and he wrote an inscription at the top of it, and it said, "Good God, behold, completed this poor little mass. Is it indeed sacred music, la musique sacrée, that I have just written, or merely some damned music, la sacrée musique? You know well, I was born for comic opera, little science, a little heart, that is all. So may you be blessed and grant me paradise." The point is, whether it's Rossini or Delius or whoever, there's this desire, hardwired, hard-coded into the human mind and heart to want to go on, to want to reach out to God, to want to believe, and to want to participate in an eternity. And we've but scratched the surface of the surface here today.
Thank you so much, Don. It's been a total delight.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, John.
We want to thank everybody for listening to our show today, and we always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
You've been listening to Open to Hope Radio, hosted by Drs. Gloria and Heidi Horsley. Like today's edition, all of our past programs are available on demand at opentohope.com, along with helpful articles, videos, resources, and links to help get you through the toughest time of your life. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for our monthly newsletter. Again, that's opentohope.com. Check it out today. Then be sure to stop by next Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we'll be posting another edition of Open to Hope Radio. Remember, others have been where you are. They made it through, and you can too, as long as you're open to hope.